and welcome to the bike show. Actually, hello and welcome to a bike. That shouldn't be too much of a surprise given that this is a motorcycling program after all. But lockdown conditions have been so severe here in Europe and in France in particular that it's been a good 6 or 7 months since I've actually ridden a bike. But now I've got this KTM 890 Adventure to tell you about, and as you can see, an absolute biker's paradise of roads to test the bike on. But first, I think I better gather my thoughts and introduce the rest of the show to you.
Later on, Don will be telling tall tales about a trip he took with Ducati South Africa recently, covering a huge distance in a short time while having himself a whale of a time. We'll also catch up with the sponsors of the show as we find out what's going on with Fire It Up. And of course, to get the episode started, I'm going to tell you about this updated middleweight adventure bike from the Austrian Meisters.
It's an adventure bike that sort of almost isn't an adventure bike, at least as we South Africans know it. Yeah, that's not a very good start to my first test in over half a year, is it? Let me try and clarify. South Africa and parts of, say, Australia, South America and the US of A have vast expanses of hardcore riding environments, and so by natural selection it's the most hardcore models of the adventure bikes that the manufacturers put out that become the obvious choice.
In the case of KTM's 890 Adventure, that means the R model, while this here is the plain old Adventure. Well, I say plain, but it is still an extremely capable adventure bike. Just look at it. The major difference you'll spot compared with the R is less suspension travel, so the bike looks lower, more squat. There's also a normal road type front mudguard instead of the high dirt bike jobby on the R, and this taller touring screen is a much shorter version on the R because you don't want it covered in dirt and obstructing your view off-road.
And the seat is more of a one-piece dirt bike style on the R model, and on here it's a stepped version which you more often find on the street bikes. Although on this particular example KTM has fitted the Power Parts comfort seat as an option, and I have to say I've never actually ridden a KTM with a comfortable seat, so I'm not convinced by this. We'll just have to see how it pans out.
Other than those differences, everything else stays pretty much the same. So you've got the same frame, the same wheel sizes, and crucially, the same engine. In South Africa, most prospective buyers will barely give this base model a second look, even though for a lot of them it is more than capable enough for their needs. They might not be planning on doing the roof on it, but they prefer the more rugged looks, and you might as well have all that extra suspension travel, just in case.
I get it. I understand. It's why I'd like a Range Rover. I'd never take the 2 million rand beastie off-road, but it's nice to know that it can bounce around in the bush if I really, really need it to. And it's the same here in Europe with these adventure bikes, with this base model in particular, because it's people wanting a great road sport touring bike rather than an adventure bike who will be buying this and making it the best seller over here. They like the looks, they like the bash plate, they love the spoke wheels, and they like the riding position. And they like the idea that they can take in a few gravel roads if they really need to, even if they probably won't. All of which means they are prepared to trade some of that dedicated road ability in terms of handling and engine in order to have those off-road good looks. Except that it doesn't really, because through the magic of engineering and science and a certain amount of what must be magic, because I don't understand it, the sacrifice needed really isn't that great these days.
Forgetting momentarily that the bike has any off-road capability whatsoever, and evaluating it purely as a road bike, you can come to no other conclusion than it is a very, very good sport touring machine. This is a beautiful road for a sport bike. KTM's Duke 890 would be the ultimate weapon along here. By all rights, this adventure bike should be, well, a lot less fun, a lot more tippy-toey with its 21-inch front wheel and dual-purpose rubber.
But it's not. It's brilliant. I feel like I know what the tyres are doing, and it does feel like there's quite a surprising amount of grip down there. Okay, it's not offering the sort of detailed feedback you get with an 890 Duke, but then I don't really expect it to either. There isn't anything like too much soggy suspension travel, and the only limitation really when you're pushing it is possibly a little bit of understeer, and then when you're changing direction like in these flick-flacks, yeah, it's possibly a little bit slower than something like the Duke would be, but it's not off-putting. This is definitely a bike you can exploit and have fun with on a tight, twisty mountain road. And in that way, it undoubtedly fulfills its role as a proper sport tourer.
This is a slightly bigger version of the engine that first appeared in the 790, and it gives a bit more power and torque everywhere, about a 6 or 7% increase. The first 890 I rode was in the 890 Duke R, and in that it made 119 horsepower and 99 newton meters of torque. Here, the numbers are 105 for horsepower and 100 newton meters for torque. Yes, that's only 1 newton meter more, but more importantly, its peak torque arrives 1,250 RPM earlier at 6,500 RPM.
It may not be as manic a unit as it is in the hardcore street bike, but that's okay because it doesn't need to be. In this, guys, it's all about having a super responsive mid-range, which it has, and perfect throttle response, which it also has. And it's not like there's nothing going on at the top end, so if you're in the mood, it's quite happy to let you chase the red line up towards 8, 9, 10,000 RPM, and it'll give you a reward for doing so.
Or if, during your journey of sporty touring, you happen upon a little side road that looks like it might lead somewhere interesting, the 890 Adventure will happily take you where any pure road tourer could only dream of going. Press a couple of buttons to tailor the power delivery, traction control and ABS for the new surface, and you're set. No need to mess with tyre pressures, just use the plentiful low RPM grunt of the parallel twin and enjoy the sights that only an adventure bike can deliver.
I have absolutely no problem in admitting I am a truly terrible off-road rider. South Africa's often sandy trails freak me out. In fact, they've freaked me all the way into hospital with multiple broken bones on several occasions. But I tell you what, this isn't too bad. It's loose gravel, rock and some hard-packed mud. And I think it's testament to the overall, I suppose, balance and ease of use of the Adventure, the 890 Adventure, and to be fair, its electronic rider aids, which really are giving me a lot of confidence. I can use the front brake quite usefully. I can grab a load of front brake quite, even though it's loose, and it works and it doesn't upset me. And same with the rear end. The traction control will let it go a little bit, but it catches my clumsy inputs. So win-win really. I never thought I'd feel so comfortable so far from a tar road.
Make no mistake though, with a wet weight of just over 200 kilos, this is still a big bike to be throwing around the countryside. So if you want to tour along these tracks at speed, then you really need to be an experienced adventure rider. There again, if you're prepared to avoid the inevitable peer pressure and go at your own comfortable speed, then an adventure bike like this opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Here in Europe, where the sports touring class is so popular, going touring on your bike, having an adventure, if you like, used to mean that your road riding was horribly compromised if you used a dual-purpose bike. Well, that's not the case anymore. These days, chassis and suspension technology has moved on so far that you can ride your adventure bike on the road and not be missing out at all, really, in any terms, when it comes to having a hoon on what is effectively a road bike when it needs to be. And then, of course, when you find yourself a dirt track that's going to lead somewhere beautiful, well, you can take it fully confident that it's got the abilities to look after 99% of riders in 100% of situations. It really is that good once the going gets tough. That's why here in Europe, this sort of bike is more of a sport tourer than it is an adventure bike as we know it in South Africa. Most people will buy it because it's brilliant on road and they love the styling. And I can't blame them. It's an excellent choice as a sport tourer, even if you never ever get the tyres muddy. I've covered a little over 900 kilometres on the bike and I am impressed. I'm also quite relieved I'm still in one piece after my very slow off-road excursion. I only did about 25 kilometres on the trails. I didn't know where I was going. I had no map or cell phone signal, so I just sort of followed my nose. The Auvergne, which is where I live here in France, is quite sparsely populated. For Europe, rugged and beautiful, and rises up in the Massif Central to almost 2,000 metres in places, about, what, 6,500 feet? But even though I was up in the hills, just wandering, I never managed to ride more than 6 or 8 Ks before I intersected another tar road, and then I'd quickly head off on the next dirt turning. Very different from SA, where you could ride for days and not see any tar. Anyway, I enjoyed it and the bike looked after me. As you no doubt noticed, I rate this bike, but there are undoubtedly a couple of niggles. The auto blip gearbox is excellent, but it's an option and it shouldn't be on a bike of this price. In fact, there's way too many options, mainly electrical riding aids or permissions, if you like, that need to be ticked before you get the bike that you want, and that makes the bike more expensive than you think it's going to be. This applies to all KTM models, and I'm thinking of buying a road bike over here at the moment. A KTM is in fact on my shortlist, but I'm close to taking it off because working out the price is so irritatingly difficult. I resent having to pay extra to allow a bike to wheelie when it obviously can anyway. The comfort seat is the best I have tried from KTM, I'll admit that, but it's still only okay. And my wife's pillion opinion is that it's not very good at all. As I've said, I think South Africans will opt for the R version with its increased suspension travel and ground clearance. And you get adjustability on the uprated forks, which you don't have on this model. Engine's the same though, and it is very good. Thought I'd missed that 14 horsepower from the top end of the Duke, but I didn't, and the mid-range is just brilliant. Competition comes from the usual places: BMW's 850 GS, the 900 Rally from Triumph, all good bikes, but only a group test will split them. As an aside, the biggest competition for the sport touring angle I talked about that's so important here in Europe might come from adventure-styled bikes with fat road rubber like BMW's F900 XR. If rumours are to be believed, then that type of competition might be in-house very soon, in the shape of a Duke 890 GT from KTM. I, for one, hope that rumour comes true. But given how good this adventure model is and that ability to hit the trails if you really want to, then it sure does make it pretty close to being the ultimate all-rounder. Okay, time for a break. Back in a moment.